In the shadowy halls of medieval castles, beneath the flickering torchlight, passion often burned with a fiery intensity, sometimes to the point of outright strangeness. From the depths of the 11th century to the cusp of the Renaissance, what bizarre confessions of love did noble hearts truly pen? 9. The Plea of the Petrified Knight. Our journey into the annals of peculiar medieval affection begins with a stark and somewhat morbid missive, supposedly dispatched from the grim fortress of Château de la Roche-Guyon, nestled high above the Seine. This particular document, dated circa 1185, offers a stark testament to a love so consuming it threatened to turn its author into a living statue. The sender, a knight known only as Sir Amaury, was a man of some local renown, a stalwart vassal to the Count of Milan, but one who evidently found himself utterly undone by the beauty of Lady Isabelle de Gisors. Lady Isabelle, herself a figure of considerable grace and intellect, was already betrothed to a much older, politically advantageous match, and had, by all accounts, given Sir Amaury no encouragement whatsoever. Yet the knight persisted, not with the usual courtly declarations of undying fealty or brave deeds, but with a confession of physical immobility, an almost comatose state brought on by his unrequited longing. The letter itself, painstakingly inscribed on vellum, likely by a scribe whose hand might have trembled at the sheer oddity of the dictation, describes Sir Amaury's plight in excruciating detail. He writes of being unable to move from his chambers, his limbs heavy as lead, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where he imagined Lady Isabelle's estate lay. He claims his heart, though still beating, felt as if it had turned to stone within his chest, a cold, unyielding mass. He asserted that his skin had grown taut, resembling aged parchment, and that his tongue, usually swift in battle commands or hunting calls, had become thick and useless, incapable of forming words, save for the name of his beloved. He even went so far as to describe the sounds he could no longer make, the songs he could no longer sing, and the food he could no longer taste, all attributing this bizarre physical deterioration to the sheer force of his love and the devastating pain of its unfulfillment. Historians who have studied remnants of this peculiar correspondence, preserved in what are believed to be later compilations of medieval oddities, suggest that Sir Amaury was not suffering from any known medical condition, but rather from an extreme form of lovesickness, interpreted through the hyper-dramatic lens of the late 12th century. His letter was not merely a declaration of love. It was a desperate, almost shamanistic plea for her pity, hoping that the sheer outlandishness of his suffering would somehow compel her attention. He claimed that only a single glance from her, a solitary word of kindness, or perhaps a mere thought directed his way, could break the spell and restore him to his former, vibrant self. Without it, he prophesied, he would simply solidify, becoming a permanent, living monument to his own sorrow. The reception of this letter, according to fragmented accounts from the period, was a mix of bewilderment and alarm. Lady Isabelle, it is said, was deeply uncomfortable, not flattered, by the knight's morbid pronouncements. It was not the kind of romantic gesture that typically swayed a noblewoman, especially one with her intelligence and pragmatic outlook. Instead of inspiring tender feelings, Sir Amaury's letter reportedly caused considerable gossip and unease within the courtly circles of Normandy. Some whispered of witchcraft, others of madness, while a few, more cynical voices suggested it was merely a desperate ploy, an attempt to manipulate with guilt. The outcome was precisely the opposite of what Sir Amaury intended. Lady Isabelle, far from being moved to pity, reputedly hastened her wedding arrangements and, immediately after her marriage, left the region entirely, putting as much physical distance as possible between herself and the increasingly petrified knight. Sir Amaury, whether truly immobile or merely dramatically inclined, remained in his castle, his peculiar letter serving as a bizarre footnote in the history of unrequited and unsettlingly literal love. 8. The Serpent's Embrace. Dive into the peculiar realm of 13th century courtly love, and you might stumble upon a missive so strange, so deeply symbolic and unsettling. It stands alone in its sheer thematic intensity. This is the so-called Serpent's Embrace letter, penned around 1240 by a certain Lady Elara of Montferrat to a Baron Valerius, a man whose reputation for being fiercely independent and notoriously difficult to impress preceded him. Lady Elara was a woman of fierce intelligence and a penchant for the dramatic, known not just for her striking beauty, but for her unusual studies of natural philosophy and obscure lore, which was rather uncommon for a noblewoman of her era. Baron Valerius, a powerful landowner with a dark and brooding demeanor, was a formidable figure, whose hardened heart was said to be impervious to the usual charms of courtly women. Lady Elara, however, chose a different path to express her affections, one steeped in a bizarre, almost primal symbolism. Instead of comparing her beloved to a lion for bravery or a hawk for keen vision, she chose the serpent, not just any serpent. She depicted it as a creature of profound wisdom, enduring patience, and most startlingly, the possessor of an unbreakable, coiling love that consumes and envelops. The letter, written in a beautiful flowing hand, described her desire to entwine herself around Baron Valerius not as a delicate vine but as a mighty serpent, her coils tightening around him, never to let go. She spoke of shedding her old skin much like a serpent sheds its own, to be reborn solely for him, to become an extension of his very being. She claimed that her love was like the serpent's bite, initially unseen, then slowly spreading its potent venom, intoxicating and utterly possessing, leaving him no choice but to succumb to her powerful embrace. She delved into vivid imagery of the serpent's silent, watchful gaze, its ancient knowledge, and its power to both heal and destroy, drawing unsettling parallels to her own burgeoning emotions. She promised a love that would be absolute, consuming every other thought and desire he might possess, weaving them irrevocably into her own. She spoke of her devotion as an eternal coil binding them together in life and beyond, an unbreakable knot of two souls entwined. This was not the light, ethereal love of troubadour songs. This was a deep, almost terrifying commitment, suggesting a proprietary claim over his very essence. The scholars who have analyzed this letter, discovered much later among the private correspondence of Baron Valerius's descendants, noted its departure from conventional romantic rhetoric. Instead of appealing to chivalry or beauty, Lady Elara appealed to something far more elemental and primal. The serpent, in medieval lore, carried a dual meaning. It was a symbol of temptation and evil, yet also of wisdom, healing, and eternity. Lady Elara seemed to embrace both aspects, daring to present her love as something both intoxicatingly dangerous and profoundly enduring. The reception of such a letter, according to the marginalia found on other documents from Baron Valerius's archives, was one of profound shock. The Baron, known for his stoicism, was reportedly unnerved by the letter's intensity. It was too much, too strange, too powerful. His usual response to unwanted advances was a polite but firm dismissal. In this case, he simply ignored it. There are no records of the subsequent courtship or alliance between them. Lady Elara's serpent-like declaration, while undeniably unique and intensely passionate, failed to ensnare its intended prey. It remains a stark reminder that even in the pursuit of love, sometimes the most outlandish expressions can be more frightening than alluring. 7. The Lament of the Living Tomb. Let us venture now to the grim, politically charged landscape of mid-14th century France, a time marked by the ravages of the Black Death and the 100 Years' War. It is against this backdrop of widespread suffering and uncertainty that we uncover a letter so imbued with a sense of morbid despair and dramatic self-pity that it borders on the absurd. This is the Lament of the Living Tomb, penned in 1353 by Sir Gaston de Lusignan to the widowed Countess Beatrice of Poitou. Sir Gaston was a minor nobleman, relatively impoverished by the ongoing conflicts, but possessed of an inflated sense of his own importance and evidently a deeply melancholic disposition. Countess Beatrice, a woman of considerable wealth and practical acumen, had recently lost her husband to a sudden illness and was understandably focused on securing her estates and protecting her family. Sir Gaston, perhaps seeing an opportunity in her vulnerable state, decided to press his suit, but not with promises of protection or stability. Instead, he painted a grim portrait of his own existence, claiming that his life without her had become a living tomb, a desolate prison of despair. The letter, penned in a scrawling, almost frantic hand, described his castle as a mausoleum, its stones weeping with his unending sorrow, its halls echoing with his silent anguish. He detailed how the sunlight, once a joyous golden hue, now seemed to him like the pale, sickly light of a dying flame, offering no warmth. The very air he breathed, he wrote, was heavy with the stench of his own decaying hopes, and the food he ate turned to ashes in his mouth, devoid of sustenance. He claimed his heart had ceased to beat with any joy, serving merely as a dull, agonizing drum, marking the slow, agonizing passage of time until his inevitable longed-for demise. He went on to describe himself as a ghost haunting his own life, a specter of a man whose essence had already departed. His body, he insisted, was merely a vessel for his boundless grief, a decaying shell waiting for the final, merciful release of death. The only thing, he proclaimed, that could resurrect him from this metaphorical grave was the light of Countess Beatrice's favor, her single glance or a whisper of her name. Without her, he argued, he was already dead, and she, by refusing him, would be condemning a corpse to a prolonged agony. He even suggested that if she were to refuse him, she would be responsible for the final literal cessation of his life, a morbid form of emotional blackmail that was highly unconventional for the era. Scholars who have examined this unique piece of correspondence, found among the papers of the Countess's estate from a later period, often refer to it as an example of extreme theatricality in medieval courtship. Sir Gaston seemed to believe that by presenting himself as utterly broken and on the brink of non-existence, he would evoke profound pity and compel the Countess to save him. However, Countess Beatrice, a shrewd and pragmatic woman, was not easily swayed by such dramatic displays. Her response, if any, was not preserved, but historical records indicate that she swiftly remarried, choosing a sturdy, reliable nobleman who offered practical assistance rather than emotional wreckage. Sir Gaston's macabre declaration, rather than winning him a bride, likely solidified his reputation as a man of unstable temperament and questionable judgment. His letter, a grim testament to the depths of despair one might claim in the name of love, serves as a stark reminder that even the most elaborate pleas for pity can fall on deaf ears, especially when confronted with the pressing realities of survival. 6. The Oath of the Undying Worm. Journey with us now to the mystical, often superstitious world of the early 15th century, a time when ancient beliefs still held sway alongside burgeoning scholasticism. From this rich soil emerges a letter so strangely specific in its imagery of eternal devotion, it borders on the grotesque. This is the Oath of the Undying Worm, dispatched around 1410 by a lesser-known scholar-cleric, Master Alaric, to a young noblewoman, Lady Isabelle of Dunwich. Master Alaric was not a knight or a lord, but a man of books and contemplation, rumored to dabble in obscure natural philosophy and alchemy. Lady Isabelle, on the other hand, was celebrated for her beauty and piety, destined for an advantageous marriage into a powerful northern English family. Master Alaric, deeply smitten, chose a truly bizarre metaphor to express the unending nature of his devotion. He vowed that his love for her was like the undying worm, the resilient, seemingly indestructible creature found in the earth, which even when severed, reputedly continued to live and wriggle with tenacious life. He proclaimed that even after his body had decayed into dust and his bones scattered to the winds, his love, like this persistent worm, would continue to exist, burrowing through the very earth itself, seeking her out through the ages. He described his affections as an unceasing, subterranean force eternally active beneath the surface of the world, never truly dying, perpetually striving towards her. The letter, carefully inscribed and illustrated with unsettlingly detailed sketches of intertwining earthworms, spoke of his spirit transforming into this tenacious creature, forever tunneling towards her tomb, towards her descendants, towards any place her essence might reside. He claimed that this love would transcend the boundaries of life and death, burrowing through the soil, through the very fabric of the earth, to find its beloved. He depicted his love as an eternal, creeping force, a silent, relentless presence that would never fade or diminish, a love that was quite literally grounded in the decomposition of matter but endured beyond it. He described it as a primal instinctive drive, akin to the worm's relentless pursuit of sustenance, but directed solely towards her. Scholars who have encountered this unique piece of correspondence, discovered within a collection of curious medieval manuscripts, often highlight Master Alaric's unusual blend of natural observation and spiritual fervor. He seemed to draw upon ancient beliefs about the tenacity of life, even in its humblest forms, to elevate his love beyond mortal limitations. The undying worm was not a typical symbol of romance, yet Alaric employed it with an almost terrifying sincerity. The reception of this letter by Lady Isabelle is not explicitly recorded, but given her reputation for piety and the conventional expectations of her class, it is highly improbable that she found such an unusual declaration. It was far too strange, too earthy, and, frankly, a little macabre for the tastes of a lady destined for a grand, traditional marriage. It is likely that the letter was dismissed as the eccentric ravings of a scholar. However, it remains a fascinating, if unsettling example of how far some medieval minds would stretch to express an enduring love, even if that expression involved the humble, yet strangely persistent Earthworm 5, the blood-soaked vow. Travel back in time to the tumultuous and fiercely religious landscape of the early 12th century, a period when vows were sacred and belief in divine retribution was absolute. From this fervent atmosphere emerges a letter so shocking in its literal display of commitment that it likely sent shivers down the spine of its recipient. This is the blood-soaked vow, penned in 1118 by Sir Reginald of Northumbria to Lady Eleanor de Warenne. Sir Reginald was a knight of considerable courage and a zealous crusader freshly returned from the Holy Land, still bearing the scars of battle and a profound, perhaps even fanatical, sense of duty. Lady Eleanor was a woman of notable beauty and piety, whose family held vast lands and significant influence, making her a highly sought-after bride. Sir Reginald, having witnessed countless horrors and made numerous desperate promises on the battlefield, evidently decided that conventional declarations of love were insufficient for a woman of Lady Eleanor's stature and his own intense emotional state. He wrote to her not with ink, but with his own blood. The letter, purportedly found much later among the private archives of Lady Eleanor's family, was a testament to his profound, perhaps even unhinged, devotion. He described, in vivid and chilling detail, how he had pricked his finger with the very point of his dagger, the same dagger, he claimed, that had smitten infidels in the Holy Land, and then with his own vital fluid, meticulously inscribed his vows of eternal loyalty. The letter proclaimed his love to be as real and as vital as the blood flowing through his veins, a part of his very essence, irrevocably bound to her. He swore that this blood oath was witnessed by God himself, a pact more sacred than any spoken word or written decree. He detailed how each letter of her name, each word of his vow was imbued with his very life force, a piece of him literally transferred onto the parchment. He claimed that this act transcended mere ink and quill, elevating his pledge to a spiritual plane, a covenant sealed not with wax, but with the very liquid of his heart. He even included a small dark stain on the parchment, claiming it was the last drop of blood from his finger, a final tangible proof of his sacrifice. Historians who have analyzed accounts of such extreme declarations, though rare, acknowledge that some individuals, particularly those exposed to the heightened emotions and brutal realities of warfare, might resort to such drastic measures to prove their sincerity. The medieval mind often blurred the lines between the symbolic and the literal, and a blood oath was considered the most binding of all pledges. The reaction of Lady Eleanor to this startling missive is not fully documented, but it is unlikely to have been received with universal delight. While some might have been impressed by the sheer audacity and extreme commitment, others would have found it deeply unsettling, perhaps even a sign of madness. Such an act blurred the lines of acceptable courtly behavior, veering into a territory of fanaticism. Records indicate that Lady Eleanor eventually married another noble, a man known for his calm temperament and practical governance, Sir Reginald's blood-soaked vow, while a shocking display of devotion likely served as a disturbing curiosity rather than a compelling declaration of love. It remains a stark example of how, in the medieval period, the line between passionate commitment and unsettling obsession could become perilously thin. 4. The map of the unreachable heart. Let us now turn our attention to a truly unique and intricate declaration of love, emerging from the scholarly yet romantically charged circles of the late 13th century. This is the map of the unreachable heart, a highly conceptual and almost maddeningly complex letter composed in 1285 by Master Elias, a renowned cartographer and scholar at the nascent University of Paris, to Lady Isabelle, the intelligent and equally learned daughter of a prominent Parisian merchant. Master Elias, celebrated for his meticulous charts of distant lands and celestial bodies, was a man whose mind was accustomed to precision, measurement, and the systematic charting of the unknown. Lady Isabelle, with her sharp intellect and keen interest in academic pursuits, was not swayed by conventional flatteries. Master Elias, therefore, devised a truly singular method to express his affections. Instead of words of flowery praise, he presented her with a meticulously drawn map. But this was no ordinary map of rivers and mountains. It was a cartographic representation of his own heart, replete with allegorical landmarks, treacherous emotional terrain, and distant, unreachable frontiers. Parchment, likely larger than a typical letter, depicted a fantastical landscape. There were vast oceans of undying devotion, mountains of unwavering loyalty, and forests of silent adoration. However, the most striking features were the obstacles, the swamps of self-doubt that he claimed he had to navigate daily, the chasms of despair that threatened to engulf him, and the fortress of her unyielding indifference that stood impregnable at the very center. He described the arduous journeys he undertook across this internal landscape, the perils he faced, and the sheer impossibility of reaching the central fortress which represented her heart. He marked pathways of longing that led only to dead ends, rivers of tears that flowed into desolate plains, and winds of hope that always blew him back from his desired destination. He even included a small, meticulously drawn compass rose, indicating that the true north of his existence was always and irrevocably her. Claimed that every feature, every contour, every obstacle on this map was a true reflection of the anguish and longing that consumed his very being, a precise chart of his internal suffering. Scholars who have studied fragments and descriptions of this remarkable babet believed to have been preserved by the university library itself as a curiosity, recognize it as a testament to the intellectualized and symbolic nature of some medieval courtship. Elias, a master of his craft, used his professional skill to convey the depth and complexity of his feelings, treating love not as a simple emotion but as a vast, challenging territory to be explored and conquered. The reception of this map by Lady Isabelle is reported to have been one of profound intellectual engagement, if not outright romantic reciprocation. She was said to have been impressed by the ingenuity and artistic skill, finding the map a fascinating work in its own right. However, whether it inspired love is another matter. Historical accounts suggest that while she acknowledged Master Elias's brilliance, she ultimately chose a marriage that aligned more with her family's mercantile ambitions. The map of the unreachable heart remains a unique and powerfully visual representation of unrequited love, a testament to the fact that even the most elaborate and intellectually rigorous declarations could fail to bridge the emotional distance between two people. stands as a cartographic marvel of the heart's labyrinthine complexities. 3. The Ode of the Thousand Snails. Prepare yourself for a journey into the utterly bewildering and undeniably painstaking realm of medieval romantic expression, where dedication was measured in the most peculiar units. We uncover a missive so strange, so intensely focused on a single improbable creature, that it must surely rank among the most outlandish love letters ever conceived. This is the Ode of the Thousand Snails, dispatched in 1370 by Lord Humphrey of Cranbrook to Lady Gwendolen of Essex. Lord Humphrey was a man of immense patience and a peculiar, almost obsessive attention to detail, known more for his horticultural experiments than his chivalric deeds. Lady Gwendolen, a woman of refined tastes and a keen appreciation for beauty, was accustomed to declarations of love involving roses, larks, and shining armor, not gastropods. Lord Humphrey, however, possessed a singular vision. He resolved to demonstrate his love for Lady Gwendolen not with conventional gifts or poetic verses, but with an exhaustive, nearly insane cataloging of his devotion through the humble snail. The letter, rumored to have been a multi-page document, meticulously detailed his observation of no fewer than 1,000 individual snails from his estate. For each snail, he described a distinct quality, a specific movement, or a particular characteristic that, in his mind, mirrored an aspect of his love for Lady Gwendolen. He wrote of the snail's slow, inexorable journey as a metaphor for his enduring patience, its delicate trail of slime as the visible path of his constant thoughts of her, its protective shell as the fortress of his devotion. He dedicated entire paragraphs to the subtle shifts in a snail's antenna, linking them to his own antennae of longing, reaching out to her. He spoke of the snail's quiet perseverance in the face of obstacles, comparing it to his own steadfastness in the face of her apparent indifference. He even ascribed human-like virtues to these tiny creatures, suggesting that their unhurried pace represented the timelessness of his affection, and their vulnerability his own exposed heart. The letter contained elaborate, almost scientific descriptions of various snail species found on his land, each serving as a unique emblem of a different facet of his love. He described the Helix aspersa, the common garden snail, as representing his widespread and ubiquitous affection, while Vesipia nemoralis, the banded snail, symbolized the colorful and varied spectrum of his devotion. He filled the margins with tiny, painstaking illustrations of the snails, some even showing miniature crowns or hearts on their shells, a testament to the sheer effort involved. Historical anecdotes and references from local chroniclers of the time suggest that Lord Humphrey spent months on this peculiar project, meticulously collecting and observing his chosen subjects. The resulting letter was less a passionate declaration and more a biological treatise, infused with romantic zeal. The reaction of Lady Gwendolen, according to scattered contemporary reports, was one of utter astonishment, quickly followed by a considerable degree of discomfort. It was a bizarre and unexpected gesture, so far removed from the romantic norms that it struck many as deeply eccentric, if not a little unnerving. While it showcased Lord Humphrey's extraordinary patience and perhaps his eccentric devotion, it utterly failed to ignite any romantic spark in Lady Gwendolen. She politely but firmly declined his advances, finding the Ode of the Thousand Snails far more peculiar than persuasive. It remains a singularly odd testament to the lengths some medieval lovers would go, even if those lengths led down a very slimy path. 2. The Anatomy of a Broken Heart. Let us now dissect a letter from the mid-15th century, a period often characterized by a burgeoning interest in anatomy and medicine, even as traditional beliefs held strong. From this intellectual climate emerges a declaration of love so literal and disturbingly detailed that it surely ranks among the most unsettling of all medieval affections. This is the Anatomy of a Broken Heart, penned in 1462 by Master Gerard, a physician and aspiring scholar at the University of Bologna, to Lady Serafina, the beautiful and vivacious daughter of a wealthy Venetian merchant. Master Gerard was a man of science, deeply immersed in the study of the human body, but evidently lacked the poetic finesse typically associated with romantic overtures. Lady Seraphina, accustomed to lavish gifts and eloquent compliments, was hardly prepared for a medical treatise on love. Master Gerard's letter was not merely a poetic comparison. It was a detailed, almost clinical description of how his love for her had physically affected his internal organs, particularly his heart. The letter, reportedly a lengthy document accompanied by crude but surprisingly accurate anatomical drawings, described his heart not as a symbol of love, but as a literal organ suffering immense duress due to his unrequited longing. He wrote of the palpitations that seized him at the mere mention of her name, the swelling of his ventricles with unexpressed desire, and the way his very blood, he claimed, boiled with feverish passion whenever she was near. He even detailed the constriction of his arteries and the weakening of his pulse in her absence, attributing every physical symptom to the overwhelming force of his affection. He meticulously described the supposed physiological changes occurring within him, from the increased flow of bile, making him melancholic, to the weakening of his lungs, causing him to sigh incessantly. He claimed that his liver, once robust, was now shriveled with longing, and his very humors were out of balance, all due to the overwhelming, uncontainable love he felt. He spoke of his heart becoming an object of anatomical curiosity within his own chest, a living, pulsating testament to her power over his corporeal form. He offered to send her precise diagrams of his internal organs, should she wish for further proof, and even hinted at a willingness to undergo a post-mortem examination, should his condition prove fatal, so that her name might be forever linked to his physiological demise. Scholars who have examined records of this highly unusual correspondence sometimes referred to as the physician's lament note that it reflects a peculiar intersection of nascent scientific inquiry and deeply ingrained romantic ideals. Gerard, rather than employing conventional metaphors, chose to literalize his emotional suffering, presenting it as a medical condition. The reception of this letter by Lady Seraphina is widely reported as one of profound revulsion. While she was a woman of intelligence, the graphic and clinical nature of Gerard's declaration was far from appealing. It was unsettling, bordering on the macabre, and utterly devoid of the romantic charm she expected. Her family, alarmed by the physician's peculiar intensity, swiftly curtailed any further communication, ensuring that Lady Seraphina was kept well away from Master Gerard and his anatomical affections. The Anatomy of a Broken Heart stands as a stark and unique example of a love so literal, so devoid of traditional romantic flourish, that it became a medical curiosity rather than a heartfelt plea. 1. The Ballad of the Devoured Soul. Our final, and perhaps most intensely peculiar entry, takes us to the raw, superstitious heart of the 10th century, a time steeped in folklore and a profound belief in the spiritual realm. From this ancient past emerges a letter so unsettling in its declaration of total mystical consumption that it stands as a chilling testament to the extremes of medieval passion. This is the Ballad of the Devoured Soul, purportedly penned around 980 by a reclusive hermit, Brother Malachi, to a young noblewoman, Lady Isabelle of Wessex. Brother Malachi was a figure of local mystery, known for his austere life in a secluded hermitage, and his fervent, often strange, theological musings. Lady Isabelle, a woman of piety and gentle nature, was destined for a life within the cloister, having expressed a desire to become a nun. Brother Malachi, however, had conceived an inexplicable, overwhelming affection for Lady Isabelle, an affection he chose to express not as a humble plea or a courtly declaration, but as a mystical act of spiritual absorption. His letter, written on rough parchment in a wild, almost frantic script, claimed that his love for her was so profound, so utterly consuming, that his very soul had been devoured by her essence. He described himself as a vessel emptied of his own spirit, now filled entirely with hers, making him not merely her admirer, but a living, breathing extension of her being. He claimed that her light had consumed his darkness, her purity had absorbed his sin, and her beauty had swallowed his very identity, leaving him as nothing more than a hollow echo of her divine presence. He spoke of his dreams being her thoughts, his actions being her will, and his very breath being but a whisper of her name. He described a state of complete spiritual assimilation, where his individuality had ceased to exist, replaced by an absolute, terrifying fusion with her. He claimed that he no longer prayed to God for himself, but only for her soul, as his own was now irrevocably intertwined with hers. He even wrote of his physical body becoming a mere shadow, a hushed testament to the glorious spirit of Lady Isabelle residing within. He asserted that if she were to deny him, she would not be denying merely a man, but a part of her own spiritual self, a piece of her soul that had, through his love, taken on physical form in him. Scholars who have attempted to decipher the true meaning behind such a profound and unsettling declaration, preserved through later monastic records that deemed it a curious example of spiritual madness, often point to the deeply mystical and often literal interpretation of religious metaphors. In the early medieval period, Malachi's letter was not a plea for physical union, but a terrifyingly literal expression of spiritual possession. The reception of this letter by Lady Isabelle and her family was, predictably, one of profound alarm and disgust. The notion of a man claiming to have devoured her soul, to be a mere vessel for her spirit, was not only deeply unsettling, but verged on blasphemy and spiritual intrusion. It was seen as a grave and dangerous obsession, a violation of spiritual boundaries. Lady Isabelle's entry into the nunnery was hastened, and Brother Malachi was reportedly confined to a stricter, more supervised form of hermitage, his Ballad of the Devoured Soul serving as a chilling reminder of how, in the depths of medieval piety and passion, love could transcend mere affection and delve into the unsettling realm of spiritual consumption.